No, that's wrong. Dixie Diamonds, 145. Metz, Isabel Falls, Dixie, 7:59 p.m. As Ed led the climb up the 2 steps from ground level to the Borden's front porch, Balloony telepath, "My plan is to provide the 2 of you with a real-time conduit to Liz and Eddie, as well as their LinkedIn allies. That way you'll be instantly and continuously updated concerning one another's interrogation. The goal is to prevent contradictions. Other than the Bordens, we all need to remain silent," Z added to the group, "so we don't further muddle an already very murky pool. Liz, Eddie, if either of you has a question, ask, but other than that, I'm just a conduit." 10-4, Ed replied as he took an additional 3 steps towards the door before stopping and addressing Constable Turganini and Agent Jeffrey. "Constable," he asked of Lala, "would you rather speak with me or Lizzie?" "Why don't I start with Liz, and then Reed and I will switch? Does that work for you?" Truganini added, looking towards Agent Jeffrey rather than Liz for confirmation. "Absolutely," Jeffrey replied. "Edward and I can chat here, and you and Ms. Borden can go inside," he said with a nod towards the door. "Perfect," Lala said, inviting Liz to lead by sweeping her arm towards the door. Liz gently placed Jerald on the patio, stepped 2 and opened the door, entered her home, then held the door open for the constable, saying, "Follow me," which Truganini did. "Right then," Jeffrey said, nodding his head toward the hanging bench. How about your bench there? Looks comfortable." "It is," Ed replied, moving to the bench and taking a seat while Jeffrey pulled a pen, small notebook, and mini recorder from his pocket before joining him on the bench. "This will be recorded," Jeffrey said, tapping his recorder, "and I'll likely take some notes as we go. I don't know how much you know about this case, but it's rather serious. We're trying to establish who knows what, who's a player, and who's a pawn. You need to be as honest and forthcoming as possible, and you should include details of which you're uncertain. However," he said, emphasizing however, "you should also differentiate between what you know and what you think you know. Speculation is fine, but try to differentiate. For heaven's sake, don't hold back on what you say in order to CYA. There are big fish involved, but unless we're way off base, you're not 2 of them. Just try to make clear the difference between first-hand knowledge versus speculation. Understood? CYA, covering one's behind to avoid painful outcomes." "I believe so," Ed said, brow knit and hands folded tightly in his lap. "I'm going to keep the volume low during preliminaries," Balloony whispered to Liz and Ed. "I'll raise it some after the constable and Agent Jeffrey finish with their introductions." Smiling at Ed, Jeffrey said, "No worries. Let's just start. You drove to Cooktown this morning and visited the library there. What prompted you to do this?" Ed, inhaling deeply, heard Lala provide Lizzie with a very similar introduction via Balloony. Slowly letting out his breath while nodding his head, he said, "To be honest, the thing that prompted our trip was, well, we heard voices. In our heads. Both of us. The same voice saying the same thing. I don't know if you've ever experienced anything like that, hearing voices. We never had, neither of us, let alone both of us at the same time. I've been in some hairy situations, but this frightened me in a way I can't hope to express." Lala, meanwhile, sitting across from Liz and likewise prepared to record their conversation, said, "Tell me why you drove to Cooktown today." As the 2 men spoke, Liz, sitting in the living room, said to Lala, "I'm going to say something that is extremely odd and even more disturbing, at least for Eddie and me. A while back, Ed stumbled across some absolutely fascinating work by a French scientist by the name of Rosier. The article was about the amazing work being done in polymers, how their strength is exponentially stronger than previous ones, and that along with advances in strength, these new polymers are also leaps and bounds more durable, which allows them to be gossamer thin. This was in a scientific journal, very prim, proper, and mainstream. There was nothing mind-boggling in that article, but this week I was reading an article that was a bit more speculative. I think that's a good word. The article I read this week was about the so-called science of ESP. This ESP article was in a, questionable magazine, but the main scientist they referenced was the same man, Pilatre de Rosier. I was shocked, so I cross-checked, just to be sure. Sure enough, they were one and the same. I found it so odd that I mentioned it to Eddie, and we were both a bit surprised, but that's just the beginning. Ed, continuing his explanation, Jeffrey said, "I'm not a religious person, and I associate hearing voices with mental illness. But here we were, both of us hearing the same thing, having conversations with this disembodied voice, and being able to hear what one another was thinking. It was bloody awful, Ed said before emitting a pitiful sob. Lizzie shrugged, inhaled, and continued. After reading the ESP article, Ed and I had discussed following up on our Pilotre de Rosière knowledge next time we headed to Cooktown for supplies, but, well, we were prompted to head to town today in order to find out more about this Rosière, and, well, the thing that prompted us was that we both heard voices in our heads that were saying the same thing. I don't know if you've ever had a psychotic episode, but neither Edward nor I had, and we wanted answers.